Good morning. How's everyone doing? Good news. Last chapter, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Very excited. So let us go ahead and begin. Let's review real quick. So, in the last chapter, Charlie and Willy Wonka and Grandpa Joe shot up into the sky in the great glass elevator. And while they were hovering up in the sky, they could look down and they could see the other kids leaving the factory. The boys were both stretched a little bit, because Augustus got stuck in the pipe and sucked. And then Mike TV, he was so small they had to stretch him, and so they stretched him really thin. And Veruca had been squeezed. Let's hear. Violet had been squeezed, but her face was still purple, and Veruca was covered in garbage. So but the four kids are able to leave. They're okay. They're going to go home. Hopefully, they've learned some good lessons. So let's go ahead and get started now with the rest of chapter 30. Here we are. The great glass elevator was now hovering high over the town. Inside the lift stood Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe, and little Charlie. "How I love my chocolate factory," said Mr. Wonka, gazing down. Then he paused, and he turned around and looked at Charlie with a most serious expression on his face. "Do you love it too, Charlie?" he asked. "Oh, yes," cried Charlie. "I think it's the most wonderful place in the whole world." "I'm very pleased to hear you say that," said Mr. Wonka, looking more serious than ever. He went on staring at Charlie. "Yes," he said, "I'm very pleased indeed to hear you say that. And now I shall tell you why." Mr. Wonka cocked his head to one side, and all at once the tiny twinkling wrinkles of a smile appeared around the corners of his eyes. He said, "You see, my dear boy, I have decided to make you a present of the whole place. As soon as you are old enough to run it, the entire factory will be yours." Charlie stared at Mr. Wonka. Grandpa Joe opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "It's quite true," Mr. Wonka said, smiling broadly. "I really am giving it to you. That's all right, isn't it?" "Giving it to him?" gasped Grandpa Joe. "You must be joking." "I'm not joking, sir. I'm deadly serious." But, but, why should you want to give your factory to little Charlie?" "Listen," Mr. Wonka said. "I'm an old man. I'm much older than you think. I can't go on forever. I've got no children of my own, no family at all. So who's going to run the factory when I get too old to do it myself? Someone's got to keep it going, if only for the sake of the Oompa Loompas. Mind you, there are thousands of clever men who would give anything for the chance to come in and take over for me. But I don't want that sort of person. I don't want a grown-up person at all. A grown-up won't listen to me. He won't learn. He will try to do things his own way and not mine. So I have to have a child. I want a good, sensible, loving child. One to whom I can tell all my most precious, sweet-making secrets while I'm still alive." "So that is why you sent out the golden tickets," cried Charlie. "Exactly," said Mr. Wonka. "I decided to invite 5 children to the factory, and the one I liked best at the end of the day would be the winner." But, Mr. Wonka," stammered Grandpa Joe, "do you really and truly mean that you are giving the whole of this enormous factory to little Charlie? After all—" "Oh, there's no time for arguments," cried Mr. Wonka. "We must go at once and fetch the rest of the family. Charlie's father and his mother and anyone else that's around. They can all live in the factory from now on. They can all help run it and until Charlie is old enough to do it himself. Where do you live, Charlie?" Charlie peered down through the glass floor at the snow-covered houses that lay below. "Oh, over there," said, pointing. "It's that little cottage right on the edge of the town. The tiny little one." "I see it!" cried Mr. Wonka, and he pressed some more buttons, and the lift shot down towards Charlie's house. "I'm afraid my mother won't come with us," Charlie said sadly. "Why ever not?" "Because she won't leave Grandma Josephine and Grandma Georgina and Grandpa George." "But they must come too." "They can't," Charlie said. "They're very old, and they haven't been out of bed in 20 years. "Then we'll take the bed along as well, with them in it," said Mr. Wonka. "There's plenty of room in this lift for a bed." "You couldn't get the bed out of the house," said Grandpa Joe. "It won't go through the door." "You mustn't despair," cried Mr. Wonka. "Nothing is impossible. You watch." The lift was now hovering over the roof of the Bucket's little house. "What are you going to do?" cried Charlie. "I'm going right on in to fetch them," said Mr. Wonka. "How?" asked Grandpa Joe. "Through the roof," said Mr. Wonka, boop, pressing another button. "No!" shouted Charlie. "Stop!" shouted Grandpa Joe. Crash went the lift, right down through the roof of the house into the old people's bedroom. Showers of dust and broken tiles and bits of wood and cockroaches and spiders and bricks and cement went raining down on the three old ones who were lying in bed, and each of them thought that the end of the world was come. Grandma Georgina fainted. Grandma Josephine dropped her false teeth. Grandpa George put his head under the blanket, and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket came rushing in from the next room. "Save us!" cried Grandma Josephine. "Calm yourself, my darling wife," said Grandpa Joe, stepping out of the elevator. "It's only us." "Mother!" cried Charlie, rushing into Mrs. Bucket's arms. "Mother, Mother, listen to what's happened. We're all going back to live in Mr. Wonka's factory, and we're going to help him to run it, and he's given it all to me, and... "What are you talking about?" said Mrs. Bucket. "Just look at our house," cried Mr. Bucket. "It's in ruins." "My dear sir," said Mr. Wonka, jumping forward and shaking Mr. Bucket warmly by the hand, "I'm very glad to meet you. You mustn't worry about your house. From now on, you're never going to need it again anyway." "Who is this crazy man?" screamed Grandma Josephine. "He could have killed us all." "This," said Grandpa Joe, "is Mr. Willy Wonka himself." It took quite a time for Grandpa Joe and Charlie to explain to everyone exactly what had happened to them all day. And even then they all refused to ride back to the factory in the lift. "I'd rather die in my bed," shouted Grandma Josephine. "So would I," cried Grandma Georgina. "I refuse to go," announced Grandpa George. So Mr. Wonka and Grandpa Joe and Charlie, taking no notice of their screams, simply pushed the bed into the elevator. They pushed Mr. and Mrs. Bucket in after it. Then they got in themselves. Mr. Wonka, boop, pressed a button. The doors closed. Grandma Georgina screamed, and the lift rose up off the floor and shot through the hole in the roof out into the open sky. Charlie climbed onto the bed and tried to calm the three old people who were still petrified with fear. "Please don't be frightened," he said. "It's quite safe, and we're going to the most wonderful place in the world." "Charlie's right," said Grandpa Joe. "Will there be anything to eat when we get there?" asked Grandma Josephine. "I'm starving. The whole family is starving." "Anything to eat?" said Charlie, laughing. "Oh, you just wait and see." The end, ladies and gentlemen. Yay! So, this is a sweet ending. Let's go ahead and talk about some things first. Let's talk about the word impossible. Impossible. Im is what we call a prefix, and it means not. We have the word possible, which means it can be done. So if you take the M and the possible, it means it cannot be done. It is impossible, which is why the Mission Impossible movies are so exciting, because it can't be done. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. But watch me do it anyway. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. Ah, right? Mission Impossible, get it? You can't do it, but you do it anyway. Anyway, M is a prefix, so anytime you see M in front of a word, it means not whatever that word is. Okay, it says that they were petrified. You might know this word from like petrified wood. It means it has been turned to stone. This actually scientifically happens to certain things. Over thousands and thousands of years, they turn into solid rock. And so when we describe a person as being petrified, so scared that I freeze, right? I am petrified. So the old people were petrified. All right, if you remember, Charlie Bucket was extremely poor. Remember, all they ate was cabbage soup, and his dad worked in the toothpaste factory putting on the toothpaste caps, and they didn't have any money at all. And so now, at the end of the story, when they get to go live in the chocolate factory with all the chocolate food that they could ever want and all that amazing, wonderful stuff, it's pretty neat. Charlie is truly a good boy. And we remember he's a good boy because he wanted to give the money to his mom to help buy groceries. Um, he is kind and respectful. We see these other four kids with their really bad habits. We see Veruca with her, I want it now. We see Violet with her chewing. And we see Augustus Gloop, I'm so hungry, I'll eat anything. And we see Mike TV with the pow, 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 I just want to watch TV, pow, 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 pow. But Charlie's a nice boy. And it says here that Mr. Wonka just wants to find a nice child. Right? Let's see. I don't want a grown-up person at all. I have to have a child. I want a good, sensible, loving child. And that's who Charlie is. Charlie is good and sensible and loving. So, it's really exciting. Charlie gets this amazing reward. He gets to now take over the chocolate factory. His family gets to live there instead of their tiny old house where it's so cold and they're so hungry. So, this is really exciting for Charlie and his family. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you finished the book. Proud of you guys. It's a big accomplishment, something to be excited about. So, good job. Yeah, I like this. Watch her. Yes, yeah. I'm so excited for you. All these people are cheering you on. All right, that's all. Take care. Have a good day. Bye now.